Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back. Our conversation for this video is all about that hormone. And we've been talking about it actually for a while. We've talked about hormones as being chemical messengers released into body fluids. And really, we should think about like ultimately they get into the bloodstream. And this is the reason why it might be a slower method for communication because it does have to enter the bloodstream, travel through the body to get to the target tissue. This also explains why it's a longer lasting response because you're basically flooding the bloodstream with this hormone. And so you're going to see those signals be kind of slower to arrive, but then continue to arrive for a little while. Right. And then also, this is how the endocrine communication can be widespread because we don't have to have that specific synapse in order to communicate to our cells. We've talked about our hormones as I think we've said this before. We've talked about hormones as being like the first messenger in some cases. So we really talked about first messenger, G proteins, and second messenger systems with regard to the nervous system. So in that case, the first messenger was the neurotransmitter, but we'll see the hormones can also function in this way. So when we're talking about the G protein coupled receptors, we are going to see that the hormone is acting as that first messenger. So when we talk about the G protein, I keep giving this story of like, this is just really negative to teenagers, so I apologize. But I keep giving this story of like the teenager sitting in the front room of the house, playing the video game or something, and somebody knocks on the door. The person knocking on the door would be like the first messenger, right? And then we've said the G protein is just there to kind of let the second messenger know. And so when the first messenger knocks on the door, binds to the receptor, the G protein pretty much gets activated. And what that means is they let the second messenger know inside the cell. So we've said like that teenager doesn't open the door, but they're like, hey, parent, somebody's at the door, right? And so in that case, the parent, the one who's going to respond, is going to be like the second messenger. When we talk about these hormones being first messengers, we are going to say that they will travel through the bloodstream and then they will bind to what we call target cells. And if you remember in the nervous system, we said you had a special group of effectors, right? So the nervous system can only communicate really to muscle, to glands, and to adipose tissue. When we talk about hormones binding to target cells, they can bind to any kind of cells. So now we can widen our net and we can communicate with bone cells and we can communicate with connective tissue cells, right? Not just muscle, not just adipose, not just glands. We can communicate with those too using hormones. And the key feature is whether that target cell has a receptor for that particular hormone. That's the thing. If the target cell does not have a receptor for this hormone, it's like it's blind to that hormone. It's like it doesn't see it, it doesn't hear it, doesn't know it's there, kind of thing. When we talk about our hormones, we will see that they can be classified as either amino acid derived, or we can talk about them as being lipid derived. And you already knew this when we talked way back in A&P1, chapter 2 about macromolecules. We said proteins can be hormones and we said lipids can be hormones. And so this is what we're talking about here. When we When we're talking about these differences between amino acid derived hormones and lipid derived hormones, the key feature is that your lipid derived hormones are going to typically be steroids. They are, remember, going to be nonpolar, which means they maybe need to be packaged with the carrier protein to travel through your body fluids, but then they're able to actually cross your cell membrane because they are nonpolar and they are lipid soluble. And then we'll also see they have this feature of being a little bit longer lasting than those that are amino acid derived. When we talk about our hormones binding to our target cells, they are going to be binding to receptors that are located either inside of the cell, and we're going to call that an intracellular receptor. Intracellular receptors are going to be either like inside the cytosol, they'll be in or on the nuclear envelope, or they might be part of the mitochondria. And so we'll see them directly involved in changing gene expression or metabolism of the cell. We'll see that it's going to be your lipid soluble hormones that are going to bind to those receptors that are actually inside of the cell. So we see that receptors can be intracellular within the cell, or they can be extracellular, which we know that means outside of the cell. Your extracellular receptors are embedded in that cell membrane, and we're going to see that these are often the G-coupled receptors. So in this case, clearly we have the hormone as acting as the first messenger, we have the G protein, and then typically we get a second messenger, which can be either cyclic AMP or it can be calcium ion. So we'll see both of these. The key thing with the extracellular receptors and those second messengers, we'll see that in some cases the cyclic AMP excites the cell, and we'll see in other cases the cyclic AMP will actually inhibit the cell. And it's dependent on these receptors whether or not the target cell can respond to the hormone. And so if the target cell is responding to the hormone, what are the different types of responses that we might see? We're going to get things like an increase of protein synthesis. Now, what this might mean is we make a new enzyme we haven't been making yet, and so this can change the type of chemical reactions that are happening in the cell. Or this might mean we change the receptors that are located on the cell membrane. Or this might be a structural change that we're making proteins that are involved in the cell growth. We'll see actually an activation of an enzyme that's already present, or a deactivation of an enzyme that's already present. And the key takeaway here is that your enzymes are required for your chemical reactions. So essentially, activating an enzyme turns on a chemical reaction, deactivating an enzyme turns off a chemical reaction. So we're changing the metabolism of the cell. We already kind of talked about we can alter the proteins that are the receptors on the cell membrane, so we can alter the cell membrane. So this might change the sensitivity of the cell to different hormones or different neurotransmitters, different chemical messengers. We can alter mitosis, which remember is talking about cell division. So that might be stimulated or that might be inhibit. And we can also alter cell growth. And so here, this is not talking about dividing the cell, but whether that cell's getting bigger. And then we can also increase secretion of products. So we might see like we're telling an endocrine gland to start making and releasing a hormone. that it wasn't currently making and releasing. Okay, so these are all possible responses that cells have when hormones bind to either the intracellular receptor inside the cell or the extracellular receptor. Remember, this is embedded part of the cell membrane. If it's a lipid soluble hormone that's binding to the intracellular receptor, you should think about your amino acid derived hormones as being those that are binding to those extracellular receptors. When we think about hormones, we're going to talk about them sort of like this hormone does this hormone does that. And so we might get caught in this thinking that, like, oh, we're only dealing with one hormone at a time because that's how we'll learn it and study it. But the body is way more complex, right? And so the body is dealing with multiple hormones at a time. You should expect your cells to always be flooded with multiple hormones. And so we have four different like categories of hormone interactions. So these are hormones interacting together. And what we'll do is define these here. And then as we go through our different hormones, we'll talk about specific examples of each. So we'll add in that layer of example as we move through in the future. A permissive effect is exactly what you expect. It's one hormone gives permission to another, or we can say one hormone enables another. When we talk about synergistic effects, synergy is talking about two hormones that work together. So they have kind of this same kind of messaging that they're doing with the body. And this is going to like amplify or increase the response. We might also see that both are required or they can be required for just like your adequate regular response. So one by itself isn't going to cut it. You have to have two. So we can see synergistic effects where the two hormones just are required to work together, or we'll see that because of their collective efforts, you're like amplifying or increasing that response. Antagonistic is exactly the opposite. So in this case, you have two hormones and they have opposing effects. Now, this could be like an example of turn an activity on, turn it off, kind of like the same idea that we had between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. Or it might be by releasing both, we get a little bit, but not as much as if we just had the one hormone being released. Okay. So it's given us a little bit more like fine tuned sort of control. And then in the case of the integrative effects, what we see is that these are hormones that are having different but complementary effects. So they're working together for the same goal, but they're accomplishing that goal in different ways. That's different from synergistic, where they're working together in the same way for the same goal. Okay. And remember, we're going to be picking up all of these examples as we go through talking about specific glands and specific hormones. So that's what we're ready for next. So stay tuned. Up next is the hypothalamus. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.